The single-track railway corridor between Zaporizhzhia and Crimea was cut off overnight. This disruption destroyed Moscow's last functional hope of securing Crimea via its land corridor. This railway was the only means of supplying the Russian army in Crimea. Field videos showed tanker cars burning east of Tokmak and confirmed that repair crews were unable to approach the area due to smoke and heat along the track. The Ukrainian side presented this strike not as an incident but as a planned operation to cut off the lifeline to Crimea. The coordination between Ukraine's 65th Mechanized Brigade and military intelligence units amplified the impact due to the train being loaded with fuel. Due to the single-track structure, heat, rail geometry distortion and traverse carbonization occurred simultaneously. The dependency of the Crimea-bound flow on the Tokmak-Melitopol segment led to the entire plan being disrupted by the burning of a single train. On the day the incident was confirmed, numerous independent reports emerged indicating that the line was not temporarily closed but had been shut down on an operational scale. While Russian planners believed they were dealing with a local malfunction, the reality on the ground revealed that a single-point failure had triggered a chain reaction of delays. This scenario clearly demonstrated that the Crimean supply route had ceased to be a reliable fixed line and had instead become a high-risk route susceptible to disruption at any moment. The closure of this logistical artery segment has weakened the technical basis for Putin's claim that he will ensure a continuous flow of supplies to Crimea by land. This disruption has put to the test the efforts announced to operationalize the land corridor on a permanent basis by 2024 to 2025. Moscow reported opening new or repaired branches along the Mariupol-Berdiansk Melitopol route and mentioned an uninterrupted railway connection from Rostov to Crimea. In April 2025, the first freight train from the occupied routes to Crimea was announced as a propaganda element. In May, a vision for an expanded network, including a connection to Belarus, was shared, and it was claimed that supplies would be secure by land. However, the bottleneck in this network remained unchanged, with the Tokmak-Melitopol segment continuing as a single-track bottleneck that re-narrowed at the entrance to Dzhankoi. The attack on August 19th targeted precisely this bottleneck, cutting off the system's lowest tolerance point and maximizing its impact. Therefore, the disruption was not merely the burning of a train, but a proof that the network's actual capacity is not what is on paper. The notion of a railway backbone for Crimea's supply has been reduced to a single point of vulnerability in the face of risks on the ground. Ukraine's planning has established a hit-and-run cycle that exploits this vulnerability. Each time this cycle repeats, Putin's claim to secure Crimea by land becomes more hollow. So how did Kyiv achieve this? Ukraine's railway-centric attack model evolved from strikes targeting locomotives and fuel trains to operations aimed at disrupting the line geometry. Between May and July, a series of trains and traction units were hit along the Tokmak axis, prompting the Russian side to increase roadside security measures. However, the cost of these security measures slowed down the pace of transportation and narrowed the windows for planned shipments. The August 19th attack directly turned this narrowing problem into a crisis by cutting off a single line. Intense smoke and prolonged burning in OSINT images showed that at least 2 station intervals were blocked. This scale differs from the local explosion, quick repair, continue routine. Here, speed limits become chronic unless track switching, ballast laying, and leveling are done simultaneously. Removing the wagon frames alone requires heavy equipment and time. Therefore, the repair window overlaps with on-site safety risks, and the risk of a recurrence exceeds the nominal schedule. The new standard is not short repair, but long-term risk management. The operational outcome is straightforward. The southern front is dependent on 2 critical supplies, both of which rely on the railway. Fuel and artillery ammunition cannot be transported by road in a safe and fast manner, and even if they could, costs would skyrocket due to capacity and visibility constraints. A standard fuel wagon carries 60 to 66 tons, and a train of 20 to 30 wagons can transport 1,200 to 2,000 tons. To meet this volume with tankers, dozens of vehicles, long convoys, and wide security perimeters are required. Convoys are vulnerable targets for UAV reconnaissance due to thermal, acoustic, and RF signatures. Even at night, camouflage is only partially effective, leaving the door open to sharp FPV raids. When the railway is cut off, 2 options remain. Either repairs are accelerated, or the cargo is redirected to the Mariupol-Berdiansk axis. The second option exposes Ukraine to longer risk corridors vulnerable to long-range UAVs and cruise missile attacks. Sea or inland waterway transport is a third possibility, but port and coastal defences have been under sustained pressure since 2023. Therefore, even a few days of disruption would result in a noticeable decrease in the pace of fire and armoured mobility. Supply to Crimea has relied on two columns since 2022, and the weaknesses of both have become apparent. The Kerch Bridge has sustained damage from multiple attacks, and the management of defensive measures has been inconsistent. The coordination of floating barriers, smoke screens, and air defense layers has been inconsistent. The land corridor has been reinforced with railway repairs and new branches. However, the heart of this corridor remains the single-track Tokmak-Melitopol segment. Ukraine's pressure strategy in this regard is simple. When the bridge is breached, focus on the land corridor. When the land corridor stabilizes, pressure the bridge again. The segment struck on August 19th once again turned the land corridor into the primary risk zone. This synchronization ensures that Crimean supply lines never achieve a fully secure status. Putin's claim of a steady flow becomes a more expensive and fragile target with each new strike. The strategic outcome is that the defending side remains under constant stress. The technical feasibility of repairing the damaged railway line does not mean a quick turnaround, and this is the source of delays on the ground. Removing the burned-out wagon carcasses requires heavy cranes and track-mounted rescue trains. When these platforms move, a mobile security envelope must be established for air defense and electronic warfare. Additional tests are conducted in bridge and switch areas to detect heat-related damage. The track geometry remains unstable, and speed limits are reinstated until ballast laying and compaction are completed. As the speed limit remains in place, capacity decreases and shift schedules are disrupted. If operational safety cannot be ensured, repair teams cannot remain on site, and operations are interrupted. This risk ties the technical timeline to the safety timeline, extending the total duration. Ukraine's ability to strike again turns repair areas into natural targets, increasing the cost of the repair and restart cycle. Even if Moscow finds a technical solution, it will struggle to reduce security costs. Kyiv's message in the strategic framework is clear, and the status of Crimea is embedded in military objectives. Official rhetoric rejects any exchange or recognition proposals and aims to increase pressure. This approach is based on pushing Crimea into the position of an expensive and fragile forward base. Attacks on railways and bridges have become routine elements of this plan. The August 19th escalation amplified the impact of this routine by scaling it up. The sustainability of troops on the peninsula cannot be guaranteed without securing the supply lines. Once supply security is in doubt, even the daily plans of air defense and air bases become subject to change. Fuel and ammunition stockpile management becomes risky due to the necessity of maintaining a buffer. As the buffer grows, the economic impact of a single strike multiplies and the cost of defense increases. Kyiv aims to raise this cost curve. While Russia's compensatory steps may produce short-term options, they do not yield a lasting solution. Although increasing railway lines and Belarus-Rostov-Crimea connections are discussed, ensuring continuous security in the occupied depths is challenging. As road tanker density increases, the value of UAV reconnaissance and FPV raids rises. Creating mobile air defense pockets is costly, and each pocket weakens another line. Night movement and decoys achieve limited success against thermal and SAR tracking. Increasing stockpiles in Crimea means accepting greater losses in a single strike. While these choices distribute risk, they do not reduce the overall risk. The real threshold is whether Ukraine can reduce its attack frequency. If the frequency does not decrease, railway transportation will revert to mixed-mode transport, and the planned rhythm will be lost. This will cause fluctuations in fire intensity and the pace of armored movements. Ukraine planned and successfully executed an attack in Zaporizhzhia to address all these issues. The timing of the attack was not coincidental and amplifies the calendar effect. Mid-August marks the peak of the summer shipment rhythm and the period when pre-winter stockpiles are being built up. A fuel train being hit during this window disrupts not just that day's operations but the entire weekly plan. Units facing a fuel crisis are forced to be more cautious in their maneuver decisions. Artillery plans are also rewritten based on ammunition and supply rhythms. Every day of the disruption reflects in the daily calculations of battalions and regiments at the front. A delayed shipment means the postponement of an attack wave. As the number of delays increases, operational pressure decreases and defensive gaps open up. These gaps are not always immediately visible, but they reduce the overall effectiveness of plans. Ukraine is trying to make this disruption of rhythm permanent. On the other hand, the question of whether the single-line rhetoric is rhetorical or real requires a technical answer, and the answer is operational necessity. There are always alternative lines on the map of the railway network. However, the number of lines that meet security and continuity criteria in the depth of the occupation is small. When the lines coming from Kerch are blocked by security restrictions, the north-south flow becomes congested around Tokmak Melitopol. This segment is an indispensable part of the flow that intensifies again at the Dzhankoi entrance. Therefore, the term single track refers not to the legal engineering map, but to the actual capacity map. Ukraine's target is precisely this backbone of actual capacity. The prolonged duration of the fire and the extension of the blockade between stations amplify the effect of actual single tracking. Even if an unscheduled route is put into operation in the short term, a loss of volume and continuity is inevitable. Therefore, the single-line vulnerability narrative is consistent with the results on the ground. Russia does not want to believe these results. This is because confirmation of the incident came from different channels and the traces on the ground matched. While local administrative channels reported that the fire could not be brought under control for a long time, publicly available videos confirmed the coordinates. Posts pointing to the east of Tokmak and around Molokhansk highlighted the possibility of two-pronged impact in the same corridor. Ukrainian sources implied that the striking elements were UAV teams affiliated with the 65th Brigade. But the results are clear, and the Kremlin cannot hide them. The real actors here are small teams similar to Ronin. These are structures capable of making quick decisions in a reconnaissance strike chain. The serial neutralization of targeted sites indicates that Ukraine's chain has matured. The risk perception for railway users has risen overnight. Assumptions about invisible routes or nighttime security have collapsed. From now on, every train must move with broader security measures and at lower speeds. This situation signifies a decline in Russia's actual capabilities. On the other hand, the increased risk to railways in Crimea's defense planning following this attack has made it necessary to rewrite stockpiling and distribution strategies. As buffer stocks are expanded, the secondary damage from a single hit grows. As depots are dispersed, the coverage of air defense spreads over a wider area, increasing vulnerable points. Ukraine can target these weak points with small, frequent strikes. Crimea's layered air defense structure is forced to redirect resources to multiple regions within the same day. Railway disruptions make this necessity for resource redeployment more frequent. When resources are limited, strengthening one area leaves others temporarily vulnerable. Strikes timed to exploit these brief vulnerabilities yield high efficiency. The coordination of air-sea targeting with railway pressure thus creates a multiplier effect. The result is a decline in Crimea's reliability as a logistics base. The message is also clear on the political front and consistent with the military picture. Kyiv has repeatedly stated that it refuses to make Crimea's status a subject of negotiation. This statement is supported on the ground by pressure on railways and bridges. Every successful disruption reinforces the feeling that investments in external support channels are paying off. The rhythm of support is directly related to the visibility of effects on the ground. The rapid confirmation and widespread resonance of the August 19th incident fueled this relationship. Moscow's claim that the network is complete has become less convincing with each new strike. The contradiction between this claim and the disruptions on the ground gives Kyiv an advantage in the war of perceptions. As railway disruptions become more frequent, political pressure increases. This pressure affects the initiative at the negotiating table. The Russian side's patch and continue reflex may get trains moving again in the short term. However, the increased security costs will make transportation inefficient and reduce total capacity. Each repair site requires additional air defense, electronic warfare, and camouflage. These packages must be sourced elsewhere, creating a chain of vulnerabilities. The safety of repair teams becomes a planning item in its own right. Large rescue trains and cranes leave radar and optical traces. Ukraine uses these traces to increase its chances of a second strike. As the likelihood of a second strike increases, repair times lengthen and nerves fray. When planning confidence declines in railway operations, performance deteriorates automatically. This is as effective a result as the physical damage caused by attacks. As I have seen so far, what is targeted in Zaporizhzhia is more than just a train. The real target is rhythm planning. Railway transportation operates on rhythm, and when the rhythm is disrupted, operations reverse. This disruption prolongs station occupations, disrupts locomotive rotations, and compresses train formations. This compression leads to the accumulation of scheduled shipments and prioritization conflicts. When military transport priorities change, civilian logistics are also affected and overall network efficiency declines. As end-of-month plans slip, the need for urgent transportation of fuel and ammunition increases. Urgent transportation further increases security and costs. This spiral eventually produces self-perpetuating inefficiency. The single-track segment thus becomes a high-leverage strategic target. Kyiv's railway doctrine systematically exploits this leverage. The message conveyed regarding the military presence in Crimea is also clear and unambiguous. Remaining on the peninsula becomes increasingly costly without line security and timely resupply guarantees. Railway disruptions, when coordinated with strikes on airports and ports, amplify the impact. If timely resupply is disrupted, the pace of attack slows down and the defensive reaction becomes slower. This means a loss of operational comfort on the front line. The loss of operational comfort returns as increased casualties and missed opportunities. The Russian side is trying to address this situation with more air defense and thicker stockpiles. However, resources are limited, and the area of intervention is vast. Strengthening one area weakens another. Ukraine's planning seeks to exploit this imbalance. The political and military significance of the land corridor has been reopened for debate with this attack. Since 2022, Moscow has placed the land connection to Crimea at the center of its strategy. The announcement of new routes and the first freight train demonstrations aim to create the perception of a completed network. However, a completed network cannot hide its fragility if it includes single-track bottlenecks. A segment that can be closed with a single blow renders the entire narrative meaningless. The reality on the ground is more decisive than the lines on the map. If Ukraine cuts the line today, it could target repair crews or bridge abutments tomorrow. This possibility makes the claim of completion unsustainable. The images from August 19th tore away Russia's propaganda veil. The railway to Crimea is now a permanent risk factor in planning. The conclusion directly touches Putin's equation of hope and is not merely a matter of perception. The effective closure of the Zaporizhzhia-Crimea line removes the assumption of uninterrupted supply to Crimea and places it in a constant risk zone. This transformation weakens the Kremlin's narrative of permanent security on land at a technical level. Repairs are possible, but every repair comes with a new target and new costs. As Russia shifts to alternative routes and modes, total risk and costs increase. Ukraine, meanwhile, aims to keep these costs at a consistently high level through repeated strikes. Railway attacks are no longer isolated incidents, but a core tool of a long-term attrition strategy. When this strategy succeeds, the strategic value of Crimea diminishes, and the sustainability of deployed troops comes into question. On the night of August 19th, this mechanism was clearly demonstrated. The central question now is, no matter how quickly Moscow repairs the infrastructure, how frequently can Kyiv disrupt this rhythm? Thank you for watching.